Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, August 29th around here. We have football today, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start doing a little bit more of the Week 1 predictions. We have the first two segments. We're going to do Miami versus Florida, a very hard game to pick. So I got into it a little bit, and my pick is definitely one that I feel okay about, and I think that's probably as good as you're going to get for that game. Then Penn State at West Virginia is going to be the second segment, a very tough game as well, one that you're going into Morgantown. There's always a question of if you're going to walk out with a win. Then we'll get into the top 10 teams. All of them play sort of layups in the first week, at least a couple of them. Obviously, Georgia we've already talked about, Notre Dame we'll get to tomorrow, and a couple others that are playing big-time marquee games. But we'll talk about all of the quote-unquote cupcakes in the first week and see what we need to see from the big-time teams as we head into Week 2. Then we'll get into all of the overreactions that are likely going to happen at some point in the first couple of weeks that I just want you guys to avoid. There's definitely some variables in this season and in all college football seasons at this point that definitely make it a little bit harder to gauge early on in the season. But then we'll get into the players and coaches that are under a microscope of sorts, players to watch in the first week that definitely are going to have a lot on their shoulders and might just have a couple of reactions the wrong direction if they do not deliver. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat feature. You see that little $sign at the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page. You can utilize that at any point during the show, and your name and question or comment will pop up on the screen, and I can absolutely address it. Sometimes the chat on the side goes a little bit fast to kind of gauge everyone and make sure I'm responding to everyone, so that's a great way to make sure that I absolutely see your comment and can get to it as quickly as possible. And also, if that does not work for you, you can use the gsmcpodcast.net page, still up and working, and we'll do the exact same thing. So utilize either of those if you'd like to get a little bit more involved in the show. But let's jump in here because this first game is tough. I'm going to be totally honest with you. This first game is an absolute nightmare to pick because these are two teams that are going to be fighting tooth and nail, and they're coming in kind of from two different directions. You know, a lot of people are already burying this Florida team, saying they're going to go 5-7. Billy Napier will be gone by November, and that'll be the end of this era of Florida football. There are other people saying, you know, we're going to prove the doubters wrong, including Florida. They're very much in on that ideology, and on the Miami side, it's all hype. There's no doubt about it. This is the most hyped Miami team I can remember in quite some time, and Cam Ward has a lot to do with that, and we'll get to him here in a second. But I do want to start this off. I think there's a number of different things to talk about here, but I do want to start this off with just players to watch in this game and players that could be the difference makers in this game. And we'll start with the Miami side, and I know that's a Tennessee jersey, but Tyler Barron bounced around the portal just a little bit before landing at Miami, and this is a very talented kid. I think last year you saw Ruben Bain. He was an absolute beast on that side, but there was no one on the other side that really took a lot of attention away from him. I think Nigel Kelly's a great player. I think Tyler Barron's just that little bit better, and I think he could make the difference of you can't double on the side of Ruben Bain every single time, and he's going to get to the quarterback a couple of times, and then Tyler Barron is dangerous in his own right. So either of those guys, just giving them one-on-one matchups all day could be a nightmare for Florida, I'll be totally honest. And this might be the best pass rush that Florida faces all year, honestly. Moving on, Elijah Arroyo, a tight end at Miami, very talented kid, someone that was going to hit the ground running last year, but ran into a little bit of injury trouble and is now ready to hit the ground running this year. I think it's a very, very comfortable option for Cam Ward. You know, whenever you have that tight end that you feel really good about, that you're in sync with, I think you're going to be the kind of comfort option, the guy that you go to on that third down that you know is going to make a catch. I tend to believe that's going to be Elijah Arroyo. They have plenty of weapons over there at Miami, but I think this is a guy that you might not know about that you're going to hear the name called at least a couple of times on Saturday. Trey or Eugene Wilson, whichever one you want to call him, he's a very, very talented kid and honestly one of the best football players on the field on Saturday. He's one of the most under-talked about wide receivers in the country, and I think he could be a real problem for that Miami backend. Incredibly fast, really good route runner, someone that if you get the ball in his hands, he's probably going to do something special with it. So definitely a guy to watch there. And then finally, Joey Slackman is someone I'm watching for Florida. They need to get push on that O-line against Miami because it's a really good O-line. line. And if they're not able to get pushed, it's going to be a lot of Damian Martinez, a lot of Mark Fletcher Jr., and it's just going to be domination for Miami for most of this game. But Joey Slackman and another number of people across that defensive line are going to have to be huge on Saturday, and I think if he can show up, then Florida might just have a real shot in this game to make some noise. But overall, this game obviously has a lot going into it. There's no doubt about that. I mean, there's an in-state rivalry. It's one that we don't really get to see too often, and we'll get to that right now with all of the big-time storylines as we head into this one. The coaches are under pressure. There's no doubt about that. When you talk about all of the coaches on the quote-unquote hot seat, it does not take long for you to say Billy Napier or Mario Cristobal. Mario Cristobal is a little bit different of an example because I doubt he would be fired at the end of this year almost regardless of the results, but things would definitely get interesting if he lost this game and they started to tumble throughout this season. And then on the other side, Billy Napier is fighting for his job this year. There's no other way to put it. At the end of the day, he has to probably get to 6, 7, maybe even 8 wins, probably 6 or 7 wins to keep that job, and it'll be interesting to watch it, and he might just need this one to get to 7 wins this year. It is a rare rivalry. We don't see it quite as often as we would all love to see it, obviously. They've only played 7 times since 1987 and only 3 times since 2004. The energy is still the same. There's no doubt about that. Every time these two teams get on the field, you still feel that rivalry energy. You still feel all of that juice in that stadium. So I can't imagine Saturday's going to be any different. And it's obviously one of those that we've missed a lot throughout the last little bit. But at the end of the day, when they get on the field, it still has that rivalry feel to it. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And then finally, the QB matchup is very fascinating. You know, Cam Ward coming over from the portal, one of the most highly touted guys out of the portal from Washington State. And then Graham Mertz was really good a year ago. I know the numbers weren't absolutely gaudy when it comes to passing yards and touchdowns and all of that type of stuff, but completion percentage, number 3 in the country a year ago, does exactly what they want him to do and executes this offense at a really high level. So it's going to be 2 very different approaches at quarterback, no doubt about that, but it's going to be a great matchup nonetheless. But moving on, let's talk about how Miami can win this game. The big one is just let your O-line eat. There's a reality here where if I'm looking across this matchup, I think there's a couple of matchups that are totally leaning in one direction. I think the line of scrimmage for the offensive line of Miami is going to be one of those. I think they're going to be able to get the push that they want, even with guys like Joey Slackman and LJ McCray and a number of other guys on that other side. I just think it's going to be too much. It's a very, very talented group. Francis Mauigoa is one of my favorite and one of the best offensive tackles in the country and is going to do incredible things this year. And then once he's draft eligible, he will be one of the first offensive lineman names called, maybe the first. And then Zach Carpenter coming over from Indiana is an absolutely huge help. This guy is going to be an absolute beast on that interior, and they're going to need to get interior push because that run game just needs to be the center of this offense. I understand you have all the weapons in the world and you have a fantastic quarterback with Cam Ward, but those guys aren't going to be able to get open if you can't establish that run game and open up passing lanes on the backside. So let that offensive line eat, run the ball early, and then let Cam Ward take over late. And then on the defensive side of the ball, keep everything in front of you. There is a big-time worry, for me at least, around this Miami back end. I think they're still going to be coming along early on in this season, and they're going to be facing some real good players on Saturday. Trey Wilson, we've talked about, an absolute beast on the outside. And then Elijah Badger, coming over from Arizona State, has gotten rave reviews out of fall camp. I think he's going to be a monster. They got plenty of weapons to absolutely attack you, and I think when you look at this Miami back end, very talented. Plenty of guys that can play really good football. Michelle Powell, I absolutely love. I think Markeith Williams is going to be a really good player for this team. But at the end of the day, it is a group that is a little bit unexperienced. It is a group that is going to rely on some younger players, and if Florida can hit 1 or 2 big plays, this game might be over in a hurry. So keeping everything in front of you, tackling well, is going to be huge for this defense. And then just get some of that Cam Ward magic. That's why you brought him over. There's no two ways about that. You brought him over because there are certain plays that Cam Ward makes that not a lot of people across the country can make. He is that talented. He has that ability. So he's one of those guys that just make sure that he's in a good spot. Make sure that offensive line is not bearing down on him and they're not getting pushed in on him all day. And then just wait, because there's going to be a play in this game where he escapes a rush and throws a ball 30 yards downfield, maybe for a first down and a big-time gain. So at the end of the day, Miami has a ton in their direction when it comes to talent level in this game. But the biggest one is that quarterback, and just let him make that big play and then possibly silence the swamp just a little bit. Moving on to Florida, I think it's very simple. You got to control the possession in this game. The biggest asset for Miami is what we just talked about, Cam Ward and that offense. If you keep them on the sideline, you have every ability to win this game, especially with the fans at your back, because that is going to be a huge part of this game as well, which is something that you'll definitely feel on Saturday. I can promise you that. They were 16th in the country a year ago in time of possession, 32 minutes, 11 seconds, so they know how to do this. There's no doubt about that. Montrell Johnson does have to be healthy. We'll figure out what happens with that likely when things kick off on Saturday, if I had to imagine, but a very, very talented guy, and they have some guys behind him. I like Trayon Webb a ton. I think Jacoby Jackson is going to be a really good player, so I do think that's going to be the path to victory. Make sure you have your offense on the field way more than that other offense with Cam Ward, Xavier Restrepo, Damian Martinez. As long as they are on the sideline, you're in relatively good shape if you're Florida. And then you need elite play from Austin Barber and Austin Barber and Crenshaw Dixon. You need both those guys to play elite level football because, as we talked about earlier, Ruben Bain and Tyler Barron are coming off the edge, and they are going to be a monster to deal with. And both those guys need to bring their A game. Crenshaw is coming over from SDSU, a very talented guy. Played 9 starts a year ago, 5 at left tackle, 4 at right tackle. He'll be at right tackle this year. And then Austin Barber made 9 starts for the Gators a year ago. So both these guys have starting experience. It's going to be a step up on Saturday. I can promise you that, and they're going to have their hands full. But if they can keep that pocket clean and let Graham Mertz go through his progressions, it might just be hard for this Miami defense to stop this Florida offense. And then finally, keep Cam Ward in the pocket. Make sure that he is standing still, because at the end of the day, what we just talked about is when he gets out of the pocket, he is downright special. He can do things that a lot of people across this country cannot do. So edge rushers, Justice Boone, TJ Searcy, they need to be up the field, make sure everything stays within that pocket, and do not let Cam Ward get out of it, because then you're asking your cornerbacks to guard for a little bit too long against these talented Miami receivers. So that's the big thing. With Cam Ward, it's a little bit feast or famine, and the feast tends to be when he leaves that pocket. The famine tends to be when he has to stand in and makes those NFL-level throws that he has struggled with in the past. So that's the goal. If you can keep him in that pocket, if you can keep him still, then you're likely in a pretty good shape around Cam Ward. And I got to be honest, making a pick on this game is an absolute nightmare. I don't love it either way, but I'm going to do something a little bit stupid, and I think I'm going to feel a little bit stupid on Saturday. But at the end of the day, I am going to take Florida to win this one. I think we have an absolute nail-biter on our hands. There's no doubt about that. I think we're going to have a late kick that wins this one way or the other. I just think it's going to be Trey Smack hitting it through the uprights. I think he's going to make a big-time kick late in this one, and Florida escapes with a win, and they very much need it. I really like the over 53.5 in this game because at the end of the day, I don't think either of these defenses are fully equipped to stop the offense on the other side, with Miami's back end not being what it needs to be. If Florida can get the ball out quickly, which they do very, very often, they can be successful. And then Miami, they should be able to just impose their will running the ball, and then got plenty of special players on the outside. So I am going to take Florida. I don't feel good about it. I'll be totally honest with you. I think if I took Miami, I wouldn't feel great about it. But at the end of the day, I am going to take Florida to win that one by 1 at home and get their season off on a very, very nice foot. And then we'll see what the conversation is around Miami at the end of that game. I probably won't change my tune too much, but there will definitely be some people ready to dunk on Miami, if you will. But let's take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to get into Penn State at West Virginia, another rivalry that we get not often enough that I want to get into right after this, so stick with us.